Hello and welcome, welcome, welcome. If you are listening to this, then that means that you have purchased my book, The Essential Cancer Treatment Nutrition Guide and Cookbook, during my special book promotion, and I want to say thank you, thank you, thank you. I am so glad to welcome you to my community. And if my book is your first introduction to me, then I hope that this is the beginning of a long and healthy relationship between us. My book, The Essential Cancer Treatment Nutrition Guide and Cookbook, was a real labor of love. It took me over a year and a half to write. I spent many hours searching for research studies to read, reading those studies, and really trying to get to the bottom of questions about nutrition during and after cancer treatment. And then compiling it in a way that's user-friendly, easy to read, well organized, and it's designed to be a tool to help support you during your cancer treatment and beyond. And if you read the introduction of the book, and I hope you do, if you read a book like me, I read a book cover to cover with every word. My publisher tells me that's not the case with most people, but if you do read the introduction, you will find that, as well as my own experience with cancer, I did help my father in his journey with cancer, and it's one one thought that kept occurring to me as I was writing the book is, I wish I had this collection of information when my dad was sick. So I really, that thought really did occur to me as I was using it to try and write it for the caregiver and the person going through treatment and the cancer survivor. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this is I do work with people who have cancer, and they're really, the message is clear to me that they're not finding the answers to their questions about nutrition. So I really hope that this is a good first step for you in finding answers to those questions. And I also want to let you know, if you did purchase this as a gift for someone who has cancer, I really want to say thank you on their behalf, and I can confidently say that you did a really great thing. And the reason I can say this so confidently is that over time I've received emails and a few even handwritten letters. Yes, people do still write letters from cancer patients, survivors, and caregivers who have told me how grateful they are for the book and how much it is helping them. And I can tell you that before I became an author, I would never have thought of doing that, to write a letter to the author of a book. But my goodness, there are people out there who do that, and I really, if you're one of them, I really appreciate you for doing that. Whether you've written to me or another author, it's so fabulous to receive that kind of feedback. And I must say I'm pretty accessible. You can just go to my website and hit contact me, and it's me that you get. There's not an administrator working for me. So based on this feedback, I know that if you've bought this as a gift for someone who's going through cancer treatment, there will be comfort and reassurance in this book for them. And if you've purchased it for yourself, I would love to hear from you. And I also want to, you just to consider this book as an introduction to me and to what I have to offer. I've come to realize that I've found my purpose in life. I really feel that when I can ease someone's worry about food and give them easy to implement sound advice that reduces their anxiety, that this is what I've meant to do. I've been drawn to the subject of nutrition since high school, and really I've never looked back. So please visit my website, JeanLaMantia.com, which is JeanLaMantia.com. You can read my blog. It's called Jean's Column. I'm going to give you information about nutrition, cancer, new recipes that I've created. You'll also find the webinars and interviews. You'll also be receiving this newsletter. Once you opt into this interview, I will be sending you a confirmation request that you want to be on my newsletter. I don't want to just add you without your permission. So you'll get that, and I hope you will accept it. I will keep you up to date on what webinars I'm going to deliver, what interviews, and here's your chance, to ask your questions directly to nutrition experts and cancer experts. So it's a real opportunity to get your burning questions answered. And I just want to say thank you for investing your time today to listen to this conversation that I will have with a very special person in the field of nutrition and cancer. I know this will be time well invested for you because this lady, let me tell you, she's at the top of her game when it comes to knowing the latest and greatest about this area. So let me shift now to introducing you to Karen Collins. Karen is the registered dietitian who promotes healthy eating as a syndicated nutrition news columnist, speaker, and consultant. Karen has served as nutrition advisor to the American Institute for Cancer Research for many years, and she is author of several peer-reviewed publications on diet and reducing cancer risk. In addition to her weekly syndicated column, Health Talk, she is the author of the blog Smart Bites. And Karen speaks regularly to health professionals, cancer survivors, and the public. So welcome, Karen.
Oh, hello. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this program.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Really, I'm so anxious to hear from you because I know you're a great wealth of knowledge in this area. And I like to, when I introduce people, I like to have their bio, but I'd also like to, hear from you really to expand on that introduction and share with listeners why you got into the field of nutrition and what brought you to the place where you are now.
Probably my parents were laughing to pieces when I announced I was going into nutrition. My eating habits growing up were not all that healthy. I really didn't care for too many vegetables and fruits, and so it probably seemed quite surprising to them. But while I was in college, I was kind of looking around at different possibilities, and it was really important to me to find a career in which I thought I would be helping people. And as I started taking a couple nutrition classes, I was just overwhelmed with excitement at the potential to impact our health through good eating habits. And that's kind of led me one step at a time to the path I've been walking.
A kindred spirit. That that sounds familiar. I remember being very excited about nutrition classes, and in third and fourth year at university, when you get into the real nutrition classes, half the class went, "Oh, this is what nutrition is all about," and the other half, me included, went, "Wow, this is so cool! I love this." So, yeah,
it kind of brings science that seems boring to life when you find out that the science that you were looking at in theory actually has extremely practical implications.
Yes, exactly, and I know that is your expertise, translating that science into the practical application. So I want to get right into that, and I want to start with some questions about reducing cancer risk. But let's clarify first for any listeners who might be thinking, isn't cancer risk primarily something that runs in families? Versus how much of our lifestyle choices, our food choices, can make a difference in our cancer risk?
Well, you do hear that all the time, and many people do feel that cancer runs in their family. Part of the thing is just to realize that cancer is among the most common chronic diseases that we face, so it's not unusual if something is common that it will be found in many families. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it is genetic or inherited. Cancer is actually genetic in the sense that genetic just means of the genes, and cancer is genetic. It begins as a malfunctioning of genes that control cell growth and reproduction. But that people tend to think that means inherited, and that's not true. Cancer risk, probably only up to 5 to maybe 10% of some cancers might actually be inherited as a gene that puts you at extremely high risk. So for the most part, when we see cancer, quote unquote, running in a family, it would probably represent either there are some variants of genes that can make maybe some people slightly more susceptible. In other words, just the way they metabolize certain things, we're getting into really detailed levels of how we see genetic differences. And there may be some differences that, somebody is more susceptible. Everybody's got the story of, the grandma who ate, a pound of bacon every day and whatever, and live to be 110. Those are the abnormalities. That's not the norm. So you might inherit extremely protective genes or genes that put you at a little bit more risk. But really the big piece in terms of cancer risk is our lifestyle choices. And the fact is that often those lifestyle habits have their roots in the way we grow up in our family. Our habits are started then, and even our sort of our attitudes about eating, about being active, about the idea of kind of taking action for your health, don't you think?
Absolutely, and I know that's what makes it hard to differentiate sometimes when cancer, as you say, runs in families. Well, is it the genetic condition, or is it that you share the similar lifestyle because that's how you learn to eat, and that's how you learned about your activity levels and et cetera. So it makes sense that lifestyle runs in families too, not just
right.
Not
and now we have the data to show that, and there's very good evidence when we look at the whole body of research that we can prevent about a third of the most common cancers in the U.S. through the combination of managing a healthy weight, healthy food choices, and regular physical activity. And so when you combine that with tobacco avoidance, that means that over half of our cancers today could be prevented through these lifestyle choices.
Okay, so you've got the attention of the listeners. They want to change their lifestyle choices. They want to eat better. So they're going to start, they've been reading the paper, they're looking at magazines, they're on the internet, different TV shows, and there's lots of shows now, focusing on health specifically. There's so many claims out there about things that people should do or shouldn't do, and sometimes even contradictory ones. What do you say to people with all of these messages that are going on, and how do you help them sort this out, which sometimes can be to the point of, too much?
Absolutely. I think there was maybe a time when we had when our problem was lack of information. I think a much greater barrier for many people today is simply that we have information overload. People are hearing all the time about how they should eat for various aspects of health, including cancer risk. And I think one thing that I know I've come to appreciate as I've gotten more involved in the media that honestly I really didn't understand years ago, and I think many people, if you're not involved in some way in newspapers or media communication, it really doesn't hit you. There's a tremendous pressure in any of whether it's on the internet or any news media, magazines, anything, to have something new and to generate interest by making it urgent that you read or pay attention to that message. And what that does is it takes away when there's basic messages about healthy eating that we've known that just keep getting stronger and stronger, verified by more and more research. When you want to share those messages, the response is, yeah, but that's not new. What's new? And so the stuff that starts clogging and getting everybody's attention are the headlines that are based on, one study in 20 people, or even animal studies or something like that, just because of this pressure for new and for making it seem urgent. And, we definitely want to keep open to new information, but what this does is it distracts us from focusing on really evidence-based recommendations. And in fact, I was just at a conference. I speak quite frequently at a variety of conferences, both for health professionals and for the public. And somebody was talking about evidence-based something, or making a comment that something or whether it's evidence-based. There's actually a definition for evidence-based, and people should know that that's a term that gets thrown around and really used incorrectly. Evidence-based doesn't mean, I could take, my neighbor next door told me she did something or other and, things turned out really well for her. That we call that anecdotal evidence. That's not what you should be basing your major decisions on. And even if it's one study, we could say that's research-based. But evidence-based recommendations mean that researchers have systematically evaluated a group of studies and really looked at them for quality, to make sure that they were representative, to look at how many people were in them, did it statistically make sense, and then looking, okay, does this message make sense in the overall body of research, or was this just one isolated finding? One isolated finding is interesting, but I would never tell anyone I cared about to make an important focus of their life based on one single study. So evidence-based recommendations are when you're feeling overwhelmed, that's the place that we need to keep coming back to. And there's an expert report convened by an internationally renowned panel, and you'll see this on one of the slides, that you can access through the website of the American Institute for Cancer Research, which is just AICR.org. And this was based on thousands of studies that took all the evidence and developed recommendations. And now these recommendations are continuing to be updated in a process called the continuous update process. And so that as more research comes out, they get pulled into this analysis, so that again, you can't do everything and you can't keep your eyes on everything. So the important thing is to not be overwhelmed thinking you have to do it all, that you have to respond to each new study that comes out. You'd get dizzy. The evidence is that what you do matters, but since it matters, set your priorities by looking at evidence-based recommendations.
Set your priorities, and also it sounds like, go for the long run. Stick with the established things, even though they don't sound so glamorous or trendy. And maybe you could, just remind us. They're probably all going to sound familiar. What are the established recommendations that you would say, in your role maybe as a writer in the media, that if you took to your publisher, they might say, oh, that old stuff, we know that. But, there's just another, more evidence that's come out to confirm and strengthen this. So let's start there. What are the established things that we can always go back to when we're feeling overwhelmed by, and pulled and scattered by kind of new and great things?
Well, this expert report from the American Institute for Cancer Research identified 10 recommendations, but I think even 10 gets a little crazy to remember. So if you look at the diagram that I'm sure some people
with
have
the 3 circles,
seen,
yeah.
the 3 circles, you can boil it down to 3 basic guidelines. The first is to choose mostly plant foods, limit red meat, and avoid processed meat. And so as part of that, it means a predominantly plant-based diet. Doesn't mean entirely vegetarian if you don't choose to do it, but at least people need to be eating more of a variety of vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and beans, and limiting their consumption of red meat and avoiding processed meat. And as part of that healthy diet, it also means limiting alcohol consumption. Then the second basic guideline is to be physically active every day in any way for 30 minutes or more. And, people hear that again. That's a perfect example of what you said, Jean. Well, yeah, what's new about that? We've been talking about that for a long time. The problem is we've been talking about it, but really not doing a whole lot in our population. And the evidence just keeps getting stronger and stronger about the many benefits of physical activity in terms of cancer survivors, which I know is part of the population you address. We didn't really know for a long time, and that's coming out to be one of the strongest recommendations, even in terms of what we've got supportive data on for cancer survivors, is to try and get back or get beyond where they were before in terms of physical activity. It can act in a lot of different ways, and we can talk about more detail on that in our time together today. And the third big guideline is to aim to be a healthy weight throughout life. Again, any editor, anybody in the media would say, what's new about that? What's new is the evidence is getting stronger and stronger that extra body fat we're carrying, people, I think they've seen, have you ever seen speakers with those like plastic models of like what looks like 5 pounds of body fat or something?
Yes.
Sometimes at food fairs you see those. It's amazing. It's a great visual because he's like, wow, that's, so that's what that looks like. But I almost think the downside of that is it creates in our mind this mental picture that this fat you're carrying around, if you've got some extra fat, you look and you're sticking out a little more over your waist than you were some other time. You think of it like just this blob of rubber that's kind of getting in your way when you try to bend over and tie your shoes. We now know that our body fat is not just a blob that we're carrying around that sort of gets inconvenient when you're trying to buckle your pants. It's a metabolically active tissue, and it's turning out that, in fact, about 20% of several different cancers that are specifically related to excess body fat could be prevented with a better handle on weight management. So really, when you focus on those 3 things, that becomes a workable target, I think, as all the other distractions, fit in. And there may be small little things you can do to kind of tweak the prevention. But when you're feeling overwhelmed, make those 3 guidelines your North Star, sort of the point you keep coming back to. If you can only, whatever much you can do, if you can do those 3 things, you really can be confident that you're having doing the most important things.
That's great advice, because I do know that there is anxiety sometimes. You hear about this new superfood, and it's like, well, where do I get it? I don't know what it is. How do I cook it? And I'm not eating it, and my neighbors, they're eating it, and they've been eating it for, So that's great advice to ease that kind of anxiety, is just go back to the basics. Now, having said that, I want to be, I guess, a little bit of a devil's advocate here and ask the question, well, what is new? So, and what, maybe not that we have to jump on the bandwagon right away, but what do we have to, listen for? What looks new or promising?
Oh, there's lots of new stuff going on. It's just that what's amazing is that most of it comes back and supports those same basic 3 guidelines in some new and maybe nuanced ways, or provides more depth, more additional sides to those. But instead of taking us away from those 3 priority focuses, it gives us a few more things to think about in that regard. So, for example, when it comes to the choosing healthy foods and focusing on plant foods, we're finding for a while people wondered about dietary fiber. With that, that was very sort of in fashion, and then it sort of went out of fashion as a concern, and now there's so many different ways that you can have fiber supplements, and it's seen as something to reduce cholesterol that people like, what is this, and does it really matter? And in fact, the evidence is now much stronger and clearer that getting enough dietary fiber is a convincing influence, and a very important influence in reducing risk of colorectal cancer. And now the evidence also shows that it's not just something going on only in the colon, it also seems to have an impact in reducing risk of breast cancer. So that's kind of an additional piece. We find that these same foods that are providing fiber, and the reason that we talk about food fiber is that while the evidence is there about what fiber can do, when you're getting it from a healthy balance of food choices, you're getting much more than just fiber. I mean, in other words, you don't want to put all your money in the bank that it's just the fiber itself, because they're finding that there are other components in those foods that seem to, along with the fiber, nourish what's called the microbiota in the colon, the normal healthy bacteria there that seem to have an influence in several different aspects of health, including potentially lower risk of cancer. And we're finding that when you're getting your fiber from healthy, these plant foods, vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and beans, the world in terms of phytochemicals is just exploding, that these can have an impact throughout the cycle of cancer development.
That's great that you clarified that, because I do remember hearing studies, oh, fiber's great, and no, as it turns out, fiber doesn't have much impact, which quite frankly never made that much sense to me. So I'm glad that, some newer studies have given more credence to beneficial fiber. It just, intellectually, I just get that better, and I guess more intuitively, that just seemed to make sense. And I'd like you also to comment on fat, because this is another one where, it was kind of in fashion, everyone's on these low-fat diets to see if that would reduce cancer risk. And so could you mention about fat and how important it is to avoid fat in the diet as part of a cancer reduction plan?
Yeah, that's a great example, Jean, of where evidence, research has, the process works. It started our concern about fat based on two things, based on populations around the world where we could see that people in countries with very high fat intake, including the United States and Canada and many areas around the world with higher cancer risk, tended to have a high fat diet. The countries with very low cancer incidence, looking at, for example, Asia, India, had very low fat diets. And so the thought was, gee, I wonder if that's the connecting piece. Is it the fat that we're consuming that raises risk so much? And then when we looked at some laboratory studies in animals, they could find this association that, yes, it looked like fat might promote cancer development. So there we go. Well, as it turns out, now we have data with large populations of people, more controlled interventions are following them more closely instead of just looking at what's the average fat intake in a population. And it turns out that when they've put people on lower fat diets, it really doesn't seem to make a difference. So the key in terms of fat, one of the problem areas, is fat is a concentrated source of calories. So getting back to what was those three priorities we said, aiming to be a healthy weight throughout life, if you're eating a ton of really high-fat foods and adding fat everywhere you can, you think you're doing great eating your vegetables, except you're, dunking it in a tub full of high-fat dressing or melting high-fat cheese all over it or deep frying them or something like that. You're getting the vegetables, but it may be working against you in terms of weight control, which is we can't avoid that is a significant impact on cancer risk. So limiting to not overdo on fat is a smart way, and evidence shows that when we avoid excessive amounts of fat, it makes it easier to eat a healthy level of calories that allows us to reach and maintain a healthy weight. But whether directly for cancer risk or even directly on weight, this does not mean that little trend we had for a while where, everything should be fat-free, you eat your fat-free cookies and you have your fat-free ice cream and all these kinds of things. Moderate amounts of fat, especially from healthy foods like maybe nuts and seeds in reasonable amounts, and healthy oils added to cook things or in salad dressing, there's absolutely no evidence that raises cancer risk or poses problems for weight control. And one of the flagship comparisons with that is when we look at the Mediterranean area, because there, when we look at Greece or the traditional diet in Italy, not Italian food as it's most often served in restaurants in the United States and Canada, but the real traditional Italian diet, as a percent of calories, fat was significant. But it came primarily from olives and nuts and olive oil. And the thing is that if it's used appropriately, it doesn't have to send your total calories too high. It doesn't have to be a barrier in terms of maintaining a healthy weight. And what those foods can do is to make healthy eating something really delicious and enjoyable. So we need to reshift that old message.
That's great. Thank you, Karen. And where do we stand now on meat? What are the recommendations about meat and cancer risk?
Well, this is one of the pieces that's maybe the most confusing for people because they, I think, have maybe gotten the message in terms of either thinking about choosing lower fat meats for weight control because, you know, a little less fat means a little lower calories, or in terms of heart disease, where the message is all focused on saturated fat content of your meat, poultry, or fish. So, for example, in terms of that traditional message, would consider a lean cut of red meat just the same as having poultry, you know. But the evidence in terms of cancer risk is that it's not the fat content that it's the concern, that red meat and processed meat each pose cancer risk concerns all on their own. So I need to clarify so often to people that, you know, they think they've done the right thing by switching from high-fat ground meat to lower-fat ground meat, or, you know, leaner cuts of red meat, and that's, you know, that's better heart-wise, but those red meats still, it seems to be a component of the iron, the type of iron that's found in red meats called heme iron that seems to be able to produce damage within our digestive tract, and that seems at the moment to be the reason that we see very convincing evidence that too much red meat raises risk of colorectal cancer. And so the recommendation is that people should eat no more than 18 ounces a week, so they, depending on how they prefer to have it, some people might still have it, you know, just about every day, just in small amounts, thinking of the meat more as a garnish, you might say, in a dish, not the main thing. Or other people might have red meat just a couple times a week in a slightly larger portion, but keeping it to no more than 18 ounces a week. And that reminds me, actually, that one of the other points of confusion, beside, you know, moving the switch from lean to specifically focusing on red meat, is actually what red meat is. Because when we talk to people, so often people think of red meat as beef, but they forget that red meat actually is beef, lamb, and pork. All three of those count in that limit of red meat. Then when it comes to processed meat is meat like bacon, sausage, hot dogs, some of the lunch meat you might choose, what you might put on your pizza. It's meat that is smoked, cured, salted, or with added preservatives like nitrites or nitrates. And these processed meats are even more strongly linked to risk of colorectal cancer. And so for that, because the risk is so much greater, the recommendation is to really minimize it as much as possible.
That's great. And when you're speaking about that, it brings a visual image to mind. Are you still there, Karen?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, sorry, I heard it click. Because you mentioned the Mediterranean diet, and you were careful to clarify it's not, you know, what Greek restaurants and Italian restaurants serve in North America. It's the traditional one, and it just, the term peasant food just kept coming into my mind because 18 ounces of red meat is still quite a bit. And, you know, traditional diets, and not just in the Mediterranean, but in many countries, red meat was not a big part of it. Processed meat was not at all a part of it. And I think, you know, that's a good message, too. It's just really to get back to that traditional diet of, you know, whatever culture you might come from. I think there's a lot of protection there, and I think it would actually mimic, you know, the guidelines that you set out already, you know, mainly plant-based eating.
That's exactly right. And that, see, to me, that's an important part of our message and for each of us as we shape it. When you start focusing on what you can't have, it develops this very negative mindset. You feel deprived. You feel, oh, I can't have that. I can't have that. I shouldn't have that. I really say flip the switch. And the point is that as you focus on plant foods, the meat becomes much less important. You know, when you find ways to make eating a variety of vegetables and fruits and whole grains and beans delicious and exciting and enjoyable and flavorful, having fun with different kinds of herbs and spices you can use, adding, occasionally some nuts or seeds into something, different combinations. You don't feel deprived when your meat portion is small or when it's a meatless meal or when you find new ways to serve seafood. This is not a deprivation thing at all, and that, I think, is really important for people to focus that as you want to make these changes in your eating habit, focus on what you're going to do, on what you will enjoy, on the new things you're going to try, not on the don'ts. Focus on the do's.
That is great advice. I love that. And staying on the topic of, what's new in cancer research, can you mention, the link between diabetes and cancer risk and just expand on that for us?
Yeah, that's become really quite a hot area, and I've been speaking and writing on that quite a bit over the past year or so. It is true, and people are often surprised that depending on the type of cancer, for example, for liver cancer and pancreatic cancer, the risk more than doubles for people who have, this is type 2 diabetes, not the type 1 diabetes that we used to call juvenile diabetes that came on with insulin, but the much more common form of diabetes. About 90% of diabetes is this type 2 diabetes. And it's also linked with an increased risk of endometrial cancer, bladder cancer, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and even a 20 to 30% increase in risk of postmenopausal breast cancer and colorectal cancer. So it's identifying this group that is already facing one health concern and realizing that the lifestyle choices that they make in dealing with their diabetes really have an impact in much larger ways, too.
And I used to work in diabetes. I worked at a diabetes education center. And that slide, I've gone back to it again, showing, plant-based eating, regular exercise, and weight control. We could remove that rectangle in the middle that says reducing cancer risk and easily insert reducing diabetes risk. And honestly, the evidence is, pretty much spot on for both of those. So it makes sense that that there's such a strong link because the lifestyle mishaps are creating both problems, and the lifestyle changes are resulting in relief from both of those. So it's a 2-for-1.
That's right. And here's the thing, is that so often when I've been working with patients who, maybe came in terms of diabetes, they say, oh, well, as long as I get my blood sugar down, and they're really focused only on the blood sugar number. And, if they can't eat well, if they're not being active, well, we'll just up the medication. Well, it is very important to get those blood sugars under control. But people need to know that even in terms of prediabetes, before someone is actually diagnosed with diabetes, it is probable that the increase in cancer risk is developing even then, because we know that as the link here is not just a blood sugar link. The link is in terms of higher levels of insulin because of the insulin resistance that people with type 2 diabetes have. It's related to the higher levels of inflammation, and an important common link is probably the excess body fat, especially body fat that's centered around the waistline, which is the most metabolically active body fat. Because, for example, when body fat goes up in postmenopausal women, estrogen levels go up. Well, higher levels of estrogen are associated with an increased risk of several estrogen-sensitive cancers like endometrial cancer and postmenopausal breast cancer. So the positive message, as you said, Jean, is that when we aim at these priorities that we were talking about right at the beginning of our time together, these are choices when you're doing it right. You're not deciding, well, should I be more concerned about the diabetes that Uncle Frank had, or should I be more concerned about the cancer that somebody else had, or heart disease? Or you do it right, and you can promote health in many ways.
I want to pick up on a key word that you said there, which is inflammation. I'm reading a lot about anti-inflammatory foods and anti-inflammatory diets. Could you speak to that, please?
Sure, and that is, you're right, it's a very hot topic right now. And I should mention again, kind of back to priorities, that, we can get very sidetracked by some of these reports that come up about inflammation. But the evidence is really clear that a few of the very basic steps have some of the most powerful influence on inflammation. Avoiding tobacco, getting regular physical activity is associated with reduction. There are markers in our blood of inflammation, and that seems to be related. Excess body fat, especially that fat around the middle. And for people who do have that and are maybe frustrated, sometimes people feel, oh, I'm so far gone. There's, what is a little bit of weight loss going to do? The amazing thing is that even a 7 to 10% weight loss, so it could be a loss of 10, maybe 20 pounds, has shown drops in markers of inflammation. Our body fat produces, again, it's not just that blob sitting there. It produces what are called cytokines, little proteins that are produced in our body fat and then released throughout the body. And these are what promotes inflammation. So when we reduce the amount of excess body fat, especially that fat around the waistline, that is one of the biggest steps we can have in reducing or preventing inflammation. And again, it doesn't take a lot to have that impact. Now, that said, there also are dietary patterns, overall patterns of eating that are associated with drops in markers of inflammation. And guess what? It comes back to that plant-based diet again. We have studies both of a Mediterranean-type diet and the DASH diet, which is originally developed to control blood pressure, and now it's been found to do a whole lot more than that in terms of promoting health. Both of these eating patterns are high in vegetables and fruits, whole grains and beans. The DASH diet is relatively low in fat. The Mediterranean diet is not low in fat, but it focuses on healthy fats like fat from nuts and seeds and olive oil. And both of these show reductions in markers of inflammation within just, like a couple months. So this is something that you can do now and make a difference now. There are some other things that you might see promoted in the news as, this has been linked with some anti-inflammatory pathway or whatever. But sometimes the science behind that is not as solid as what you might be led to think. Some of the laboratory studies don't necessarily translate to what we actually see in human beings. The laboratory studies are good starting points for studies, but you can't assume that what happens in a test tube or even in a mouse is what's going to happen in you.
Okay, so it sounds like you're saying don't get sidetracked by an anti-inflammatory diet or something specifically labeled that. Stay the course. Stay on your Mediterranean diet, your DASH diet, or your plant-based diet. You will reduce inflammation, plus diabetes risk and cancer risk.
Right, and especially, we have to say, focusing on doing whatever you can, reaching and maintaining a healthy weight. That doesn't mean that it's the opposite. I mean, I guess that's why it's so important to put both of those messages in the same thought, because when you hear the focus on weight, it can lead you in all kinds of crazy directions based on the stuff you read and hear. And what we're saying is that weight really matters in terms of cancer risk, but the evidence is that really it doesn't take a lot of weight loss to make a difference. And, wherever you are, even just most adults gain weight every year. And if all you did was stop gaining, that would be fabulous. And so the important thing is not to find a crazy diet that you can lose, whatever, but then a year from now you're going to be right back where you started from or worse. Use the time that you're working on reaching or maintaining a healthy weight to develop a healthy, plant-based eating pattern that really works for you and that you can picture yourself enjoying so much. It's a path, it's a journey that each day you keep working at it and just experimenting and trying new dishes, trying new ways of preparing healthy foods, that you're really, as you said, Jean, you're going for the long game here. And when you take that perspective, each day gets easier than the last in a path of healthy living.
Yeah, I worked I had a private practice for 7 years in a health club, and I saw the majority of the clients were for weight loss. And I must say, of the ones who had that, I call it the all or nothing approach. Okay, they wanted to lose 50 pounds or they weren't happy. They wouldn't be satisfied with just 10. I often found that they were the ones that would, yo-yo up and down versus where you say just if your trend has been to gain weight through your whole adult life, goal number one, stop that weight gain and, be happy with the small goals as long as it allows you to stay the course on that good diet and doesn't get you, sidetracked in some unhealthy fad diet that really is sacrificing good nutrition just for the rapid weight loss.
Exactly. I can't say the number of people I have worked with in my counseling practice who would say, oh, man, if I could just go back to the weight that I was unhappy with last time, I would be happy. Because they go on a diet, lose some weight, then they rebound and gain more than they ever started with. And each time they've gone through this, dieting approach over the years, they're heavier than they ever were. And, they look back and they think, oh, why, if I could have just been, working at making a healthy lifestyle that I could live with back before, they would be happy. It's just that at the same time, I think we do have the reality check that sometimes people think, oh yeah, I'm eating really healthy. Well, if you're eating really healthy but you keep gaining weight every year, reality check is maybe you are making healthy choices, but maybe it's just that your portions have gotten too large. In this world we're living in with high portions, you can eat healthy foods, but just plain overeating, if you're making the right choices, your foods aren't so concentrated in calories, and the calories don't add up so easily. So it is easier to maintain a healthy weight when you're making healthy food choices. But if you're going
Karen? Okay, so we've lost Karen. She's going to...
Oops, hello?
Hello, are you still there? Okay.
I am. Did you miss something there? Uh-oh.
Yeah, you did cut out. So let's just backtrack a little bit to, you were talking about making healthy food choices. It was just a few seconds that cut out.
Oh, that's too bad. I'm sorry about that. I'm not sure what happened. But the point is that if you're making healthy food choices, it does make reaching and maintaining a healthy weight easier because the food's just not as concentrated in calories. You can eat a satisfying amount, satisfy your hunger, and not be consuming too many calories. But I do think it's important that there are some people, everybody's different. And one of the frustrations for some people is they'll say, oh, I'm eating really healthy, so how come I'm not losing weight? And the answer may be in terms of portion. One of the approaches that the American Institute for Cancer developed is called the New American Plate, and it's focused on both choosing what you choose and how much you choose. And in this world of huge, huge portion sizes, if your weight is not staying steady or if you're having trouble losing, then perhaps look at the portion sizes of what you're eating. Or another element I know from the clients I worked with over the years and even for myself is it might not be hunger that's driving your eating. You can eat healthfully, but if you've got non-hunger eating going on, either because of boredom eating or emotion-based eating, that can still lead you to eat too much, and then that becomes a concern too.
Absolutely. That was a big part of my practice. So what I'm hearing from you is get that healthy plant-based eating diet going, get the portions under control. What if someone is still struggling with weight? Can you talk about physical activity, that other piece of the puzzle here? Karen, you seem to have cut out again.
Uh-oh.
Can you hear me?
Am I there? I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, okay, now you're back.
Oh, so sorry. Hello?
Okay, that's all right.
Okay, so yes, physical activity has really a dual part of our efforts to reduce cancer risk. It is an important part of weight management. The hard part for people to grasp or to accept, I guess, is it's not easy to take a sedentary lifestyle and become active regularly. It's not hard. I mean, it doesn't need to be painful. It doesn't need to be anything negative. That can be a great, great joy, but just behavior change, changing habits is tough. And so when you make that effort, like say I got out for my 30-minute walk every day this week, and mentally that was such a tough effort to include that, to stop what I'm doing, to take time in my life. People think they're going to drop 10 pounds from doing that, and that's just not true. The physical activity impacts weight really in a much more long-term sense. It's very clearly, in study after study, a part of what helps people lose weight in the long term and really a key element in maintaining weight and avoiding that weight gain. But let me just say that for people that get frustrated and think, oh, what is this? I don't feel like I'm accomplishing anything. I've gotten out for my walk. The important message we've got now based on research is that if you take a walk today, yeah, you're going to come home, you're not going to weigh any different than when you walked out the door, but you will have changed what's going on inside you. We now show through a number of different kinds of studies that physical activity, even outside of its impact on weight, affects insulin levels. And remember, we were talking about one of the connections between diabetes risk, between excess body fat and cancer risk, is this tendency for elevated insulin levels. Insulin isn't just a hormone that controls blood sugar. It also sets off some other cell pathways that seems to contribute to cancer cell growth and development. Well, when you're physically active, that helps to bring down elevated levels of insulin. We also see that apart from its impact on total weight, physical activity is changing inflammation and abdominal fat. And I find that for many people, even though it might not directly lead to great weight loss in terms of how many calories you burn, it's not all that much just in one 30-minute walk, but it does seem to change so many of our influences on how we eat. People are afraid that if they exercise, it's going to increase their appetite and make them want to eat so much more. And actually, as long as you're not going crazy, I mean, somebody who's training for the Olympics and is doing massive amounts of exercise, yes, their appetite increases, and that's a good thing because they need a lot more fuel. But the fact that you take a walk generally is not going to increase your appetite, and for many people actually helps to moderate their appetite. And for people who have been stress eaters, emotion-based eaters, physical activity can have a huge impact in smoothing out our emotions and helping to deal with that other side. And if it works that way, that may be one of the most important influences on how it's helping you with your weight. So the evidence is that physical activity seems to reduce cancer risk through helping you with weight, but it's really important to know that
Karen? Okay, yep, you cut out again. But I think what you were going to say was, I'm just trying to think of your last sentence before it cut out, but it's important to know that with physical activity, I think you're wanting to head into the idea that in and of itself will reduce your cancer risk.
That's right, exactly. Thank you.
You're welcome, and I think that's a great take-home message is that, even if you're not seeing a reduction in the scale with that physical activity, there's so many, many, many benefits. Don't stop. Don't just focus on weight as your only outcome with physical activity, because there's this whole, biochemical planet inside that body, and it's making important changes in your hormones that are going to have long-term effects on your health. So keep going. Don't stop with the activity. And I think we'll hold it there. This has been great information and really practical things that people can apply. I found it very valuable to get caught up on what's new and, what's not new but reinforced by new evidence. And I know I can safely say that I've invested my time wisely to have spent this with you. And I would just like to compliment you and say that you really are in your genius with the work that you do. I know that you're an advisor for the American Institute for Cancer Research, which I think is a great organization, by the way. It's my go-to bookmark site for nutrition and cancer information. So people will check that out. But when I read the professional statements around cancer, they're not very, what I would call, consumer friendly. It's very factual, and it's how it is, and this is what the research shows. It's, what we're used to, when we do, higher degrees in nutrition. So I know you can talk that talk if you need to. But I also have, witnessed that you're able to talk all of that and boil it down into consumer-friendly stuff so that, one, people can understand what you're saying. Two, they can feel well-fed but not stuffed. So they're not overwhelmed by your message. And after listening to you, they're armed with very practical and easy to implement action steps. So I want to acknowledge you for that gift that, you're in your groove. You keep going. I know you can speak both of these languages, and you did a great job, translating it for, a consumer-friendly audience. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
Karen, you've cut out again.
Are you there now?
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that positive feedback. And, yes, I hope that people will use the AICR website and also will come to my website, KarenCollinsNutrition.com, where my blog, I try to follow the research and help people make sense of those headlines that just get a little overwhelming sometimes.
And I know you've also got the syndicated column, Health Talk, and your blog, Smart Bites. How do people find you and follow your work?
Well, you can follow the blog. Actually, if you go right to my website, KarenCollinsNutrition.com, there's a spot right on the top toolbar to click on the blog, Smart Bites. And if you'd like, people can sign up to even receive it regularly by email or by RSS feed so they don't miss a thing. I am on Twitter, too. My Twitter handle is KarenCollinsRD. And just keep following. The Health Talk column is syndicated in lots of different places, but is also accessible through the AICR website.
Super. So lots of ways that they can stay in touch with you. So thank you, Karen. I look forward to the next time we can speak. And I want to thank you, the listener, for investing your time with us. It's important to implement now some of the recommendations that Karen made. I know knowledge is power, but action is key. So don't forget to start making some changes to improve your nutrition. If you're doing everything already, stay tuned. I'm going to keep you on your toes with lots of great, action steps. You're going to hear from me in various formats. You could follow my blog. You've entered your name and your email already to receive this gift, and so you will then can now accept subscription to my newsletter, and I will keep it coming. So my newsletter is short, it's easy to read, there's no click-offs on the page. That's how I like to read a newsletter, so that's how I designed mine. It's going to have a nutrition tip in each one. I'm also going to let you know what webinars and interviews are upcoming. And I look forward to spending more time with you in the future, with communicating with you as you post things and comment on blogs, etc. And thank you again for my book, and I look forward to hearing your comments about that. And thank you, and goodbye to Karen, and goodbye to all of our listeners.
Bye, everybody.